making the deal working.
Yasser Munif, can you comment on what the UN envoy for Syria said, and in particular the point he makes about Jabhat al-Nusra and their working with opposition forces in Syria?
The level and the scale of the violence against the Syrian population in Syria is basically it's because of the monumental resilience and resistance of the Syrian population. We have to remember that the Syrian revolution has been going for 5 years, and it has many enemies, including the US and Russia and Iran and Hezbollah and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth. And all these different forces, for different reasons, are trying to crush the Syrian revolution. The Syrian regime has been, since the beginning, trying to crush the secular and the progressive dimension of the revolution, and pushed the jihadists and empowered them and released them from prison, and they have become what they are today. And the Russian also are trying to basically break that kind of difference or differentiation between the moderate and the secular to a certain extent and the jihadist groups. And by using that type of violence and massacring the population, slaughtering people in Aleppo, it's pushing the moderate groups and Al-Qaeda to basically form an alliance, and as such pushing the West to basically choose the lesser evil, and that lesser evil being the Syrian regime as opposed to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And even the UN played a very detrimental role in the Syrian conflict. I mean, the reports that show how the UN has been helping and dropping aid to the besieged city of Deir ez-Zor, which is under the control of the Syrian regime, but never dropping aid to any of the areas controlled by the opposition, or some of the funding that reached the Syrian military that was sent by the UN and so on. So the role of the UN is really detrimental. The Mistura is basically and clearly biased toward the Syrian regime.
I wanted to ask you about a comment that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said in an interview last week on AP, the Syrian president denying government forces are besieging the rebel-held areas of Aleppo.
If there's a really besiege or siege around the city of Aleppo, people would have been dead by now. This is first. Second, more importantly, they've been shelling the neighboring areas and the position of the Syrian army for years, non-stop shelling of mortars and different kind of lethal bombs. How could they be starving while at the same time they can have armaments? How can we prevent the foods and the medical aid from reaching that area, and we cannot stop the armament from reaching that area? They accuse Syria of attacking hospitals. So you have hospitals and you have doctors and you have everything. How could you have them? How could you have armament? That's the question. How can you get armament to your people if you claim that you have people in grassroots while you don't have food? They have to explain. I don't have to explain. The reality is telling.
That's the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Yasser Munif, can you respond?
So the Syrian regime very early understood the importance of the media and creating a discourse in addition to what's happening on the ground, the military aspect of the conflict. And it was able, unfortunately, to create a parallel reality and create a media apparatus and information propaganda that is relayed by a number of different networks, including RT, the Russian TV, but also a number of different websites and news outlets here in the US, for example, Mint Media and Counterpunch and others, who are basically repeating such silly things. I mean, anyone can verify and see that there is a siege around Aleppo. It's not very difficult to do. If journalists wanted really to talk to people on the ground and interview them and get their views, it would be very easy. But the Syrian regime basically understands that and is using the media and that type of discourse as a weapon against the revolution, basically trying to confuse the different audiences and telling them that there are different truths, there are biases, we're not sure, basically creating confusion and challenging what's happening on the ground.
Well, today The Intercept obtained internal UN emails that revealed also that US and European sanctions are having an extremely detrimental effect on ordinary Syrians and making access to aid supplies more difficult. Yasser Munif, could you respond to that?
Sure. I mean, this is also another aspect. The Syrian regime is using all weapons that are available for it to use, including besieging entire areas, starving the population, using bunker busters bombs with the aid of the Russian, torturing the population, preventing water from reaching certain areas, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, I mean, the sanctions, as we know from previous experience with Iraq and so on, affect for the most part the civilian population. And that's another example of how the Syrian population is basically surrounded and besieged in so many different ways. I also wanted to mention that, as your previous guest mentioned earlier, that today we are witnessing or celebrating the first anniversary of the Russian intervention. And we are organizing a number of revolts in more than 30 different cities around the world on October 1st to basically raise awareness and tell people what's happening. There will be revolts, protests, rallies, sit-ins to basically try to break the siege around the Syrian revolution and tell people that the narrative that they're hearing about the civilian war and intervention and so on are part of what is happening. The other part is the resilience of the Syrian population, its resistance, and the ongoing Syrian revolution with its creative dimension and what people are doing within in myriad different ways.
Yasser Munif, we want to thank you for being with us, Syrian scholar, professor at Emerson College in Boston, and Osama Nasr speaking to us from East Ghouta, Syria. We're going to continue this conversation and post it online at democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.